Hi, you're watching Jasper Drive Time. Make sure you hit the like, press subscribe and ding the bell because we have really hot videos that are appearing. I've got another one for you today. This is a case of a doctor, Dr. Gladys Ogbuneke. Worked hard for her qualifications in Nigeria. Born in Britain, but relocated to Nigeria, qualified, reached the top of her professional tree in terms of being desiring to be an orthopedic surgeon. You won't believe what happened to her. Now I'm going to say from the get-go, this is a long video. So those of you who haven't got the brain attention of a gnat, best leave the platform now and go and find some cartoons to watch. For those of you who are interested in the complex issues that face black workers in the NHS, I suggest you get tea, biscuits, sit down and listen to this interview. You're watching Jasper Drive Time. This is our continued focus on racism in the NHS. And this is the story of Dr. Gladys Ogbuneke. Hi, my name's Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Jasper Drive Time. Welcome, Dr. Gladys Ogbuneke.
Correct.
You're a qualified doctor. When did you qualify as a doctor?
I qualified as a medical doctor in April 1990 from the College of Medicine, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in Nigeria.
And you came to the United Kingdom from Nigeria when?
I was actually born in Islington, London, but I had to go back to Nigeria with my parents. So I returned back to England in January of 1997 and had to do the requalification exam called the Professional and Linguistic Assessment Board Exam, PLAB, from the General Medical Council. That was in July of 1997.
So PLAB is an exam that foreign doctors who are qualified outside of the UK need to undertake in order to ensure that they're at the British standard, as it were.
Correct.
Of medicine.
Then I took up what I'll call a clinical attachment.
Yeah.
It's like a voluntary but observation period of time to also get yourself into the NHS system as against wherever you had qualified. So I did that at the Walsgrave Hospital, it was called that time, but now the University Hospital of Coventry and Warwickshire in Coventry. So I did that for 6 months under general surgery, under a general and vascular surgeon. And then after that, with good references from them, I was now able to get into proper substantive post. In medical school, we now have to do rotation of the different specialties. And when I had a chance to work at the National Orthopedic Hospital in Enugu, and I saw people with fractures, with burn injuries, with a lot of things, and how they had to go through surgery to get well. So that was when I picked up the interest in orthopedics. And I said, I want to train as an orthopedic surgeon to also make some impact in that field.
You did all that hard work to qualify, and you're about to embark on your profession here in the United Kingdom. But it didn't go quite according to plan. Tell us a little more about your experience of working in the NHS.
I've worked in NHS for over 14 years with really impeccable results and impeccable history. I'd worked as an SHO, senior house officer, and also up to being a registrar. So because I chose the pathway to be a surgeon, I trained through the Royal Colleges of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland. And I did my basic surgical training with the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, Dublin. It's called a CCBST. So I got what is called a certification of completion of the basic surgical training. Now, I did my FRCS exam, the Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, part 1 and part 2, also with the Royal Colleges of Surgeons. I got through with all that in 2008.
Wow.
Then...
So you passed?
Yes.
You qualified?
Correct.
And you were happy?
I was very happy.
Your family was happy?
My children, my husband, everyone was happy.
So you're about to hopefully enjoy a career as a surgeon?
Yes, to go into what we now call a higher surgical training,
right,
which you now focus on the area of surgery you want to do.
To specialize in? Correct.
Then I did a master's program and MSc, Masters in Surgical Sciences, at the Imperial College under Professor Sean Hughes, Charing Cross Hospital. And after the research study, I had an award with that. I did a research study on bone molecular transport, and I worked with Professor Hughes. But after that, I decided to travel to the US.
So you did some award-winning research?
Yes.
On bone breakages and fractures?
Yes.
Wow. So
that's the standard.
Qualified,
yes, please,
internationally.
Correct.
You've been awarded and recognised as a leader in your specialist field of fractures. You've set new standards in orthopaedic treatment here in the United Kingdom and throughout Europe with the new approach, innovation that you brought back from the United States.
Yes, please.
So one assumes that you're in prime position for a great career within the NHS.
I was hopeful.
Tell us what happened.
Now looking back, I was unfortunate to have been working at the South London Healthcare NHS Trust, precisely the Princess Royal University Hospital. That was between October 2010 and March of 2011.
Yeah.
Initially, I was posted to work under a Mr. Rand, Christopher Rand. He's now late anyway, unfortunately. That was in October 2010. But the treatment I got from that gentleman, it wasn't very palatable. He was the one that even made me to realize that I was a female and in orthopedics. This is me for over 13 years before I came to him. I'd been working in the hospital. I've worked across NHS, and I've not had any consultant or any person make me feel, oh, you're a female, why must you be in orthopedics? But Mr. Rand asked me that question to my face and was like, you are a female black doctor. Why do you think that you'll be able to make it in orthopedics? Initially, I was upset. And after a while, I felt very vulnerable because I complained to one or two other consultants, Mr. Mark Chatterton, who I was later to work with. And I thought that the hospital or somebody somewhere would be able to tell him to stop what he was doing.
Right.
But it didn't work out that way. So at a point, I had to request to be transferred from his unit to another unit. And to make it worse, there was a day, 7th of October, 2010. I remember it very well because my birthday happens to be 8th of October. So it was a day before my birthday that year. And I was the trauma registrar on call with Mr. Rand. Now, we have patients that have full hip surgery, and we have some that have what we call half hip replacement, hemiarthroplasties. So we had 2 cases for hemi, and Mr. Rand and I did the first one. I assisted him. For the second case, he asked me, Gladys, are you okay to do the second one? I said yes. He says, okay, that he's around if I need help.
Right.
I said, thank you. This is a normal consultant registrar practice. Yeah. So I went on with that. However, to my surprise, my assistant, who is now an SHO, one of the senior house officers, when I requested for a suction tube for my assistant to use to clear the bloody, operative field for me, I was told that Mr. Rand does not like suction tube to be used on his patient. And I said, why is that? They say, that's just Mr. Rand. That's what he says. I say, but how do I see where I'm operating? Because I've opened up. If the area is not suctioned up. And I say, moreover, this woman's HB is just 8.0, meaning it's just borderline. And she's an 80-year-old, frail, dehydrated woman. And I didn't like the idea that I have to be there blindly trying to harvest, remove the broken femoral head. So I now say to them, please, can somebody call Mr. Rand so that he can come and harvest the femoral head the way he knows best without suction tube? That I don't think it's fair to just be rummaging here and not remove it. Good. So Mr. Rand was called in. He came. He used, because I understood later on that he used to be a soldier. He used to work in the army, so that he knows how to do a few things without the ordinary ways of doing things. So he came, and after a while, harvested the femoral head. When he finished, he said to me, okay, Gladys, are you now okay to continue? I said yes. So I took the femoral head, sized it in the normal procedures we normally do, and I completed the surgery with my SHO, who was assisting me. But to my surprise, after about 2 or 3 weeks, Mr. Mark Chatterton called me aside.
Mark Chatterton?
He's one of the consultants.
Right.
I was later on to be transferred to his unit.
Yes.
He called me aside and said that Mr. Rand has just sent a circular to all the consultants to say that Gladys doesn't know how to do a hip hemiarthroplasty and that I should not be allowed to do any of their cases. And what happened? I explained to him what happened on the 7th of October. I said, that doesn't mean I don't know how to do a hemiarthroplasty. I'm concerned for my patient rather than being heroic, trying to just work blindly. And it is not fair on such a frail old lady that I should just be causing her to bleed more when I knew there was no need. If I had a suction tube, I would do my operation quickly. Now, to God being on my own side, yes, I'll use God. I'm a committed Christian. I don't force my religion on people. But to God's will, I now had a chance to work with another consultant, Mr. Paul Gill. A weekend I was on call with him. And I did about 4 hemiarthroplasties.
Right.
I used suction tubes. He was fine with that.
Well, so does everybody else use suction
tubes? Yes, and also Mr. Chatterton. So that was it. But he had
all of those operations were fine.
They were fine. My patients were fine.
So as long as you can see what you're operating on,
I'm fine.
Then you're absolutely fine.
Exactly. Fine. So that was what happened. But Mr. Rand didn't stop there. He will accost me in the theater suite. That is our lounges we wait before we go in for surgery. And he continues to say, why don't you just allow me? Let me speak to human resources. Let them reduce your posting to just be ordinary locum so that you don't have to go here with a reference, but that you'll be paid more money and then it won't be added to your training. I said, no, I have come here after an interview post. Yes, I did a locum here before, but after an interview, and I have this as a substantive job, I want to retain it in that way. But because of his harassment, I had to, because in all honesty, he reduced me to tears a few times. And Mr. Chatterton knew that also, because he had the same office with Mr. Rand. So many times that Mr. Rand was being nasty to me, he knew about it. So upon my own request, I contacted the clinical director following the advice of Mr. Chatterton. He said, okay, since Mr. Rand is making it difficult for you to work with him, maybe it's best you now speak to the clinical director. And I did that. So the clinical director now called for a meeting. I think it was around 11th or 12th of January 2011. And he transferred me from Mr. Rand's unit to work with Mr. Chatterton. And then Mr. Chatterton's registrar was then to work with Mr. Rand.
Right.
So that was how I was removed from under his nose, so to speak.
So your first encounter really is with this consultant, Mr. Rand, who's clearly decided to target and harass you in your place of work.
Yes.
And you've eventually moved in the hope that you can restart your career and focus on helping people rather than dealing with a consultant who seems to have a problem with African women. So you moved and we moved to your new posting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Mr. Chatterton, he's one of the consultants also in the same department in orthopedics. He himself wasn't very particularly difficult to work with. He's actually a very kind person, and kind in the sense that not just to me but also to the other junior doctors. If you're on trauma call with him, he supports you. He's there in the theater with you and guides you through your surgical posting. I worked with Mr. Chatterton in that January, February, and March. I did a couple of total hip replacement procedures with him. I also did some knee replacement surgeries with him and ankle surgeries.
All fine?
All fine.
So,
and also, all my, because in total, in that hospital, for the period of the 3 months, I did about nearly 200 procedures, yes, in that hospital.
And they're all good?
And mostly all of them were good.
Yeah.
90-something% of them were good.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the issues and challenges that you faced in the NHS. What happened next?
In that hospital, the first challenge I experienced was when I was on trauma call and I was to do what we call a dynamic hip fixation, DHS, screw fixation. And that was in a very, really big girl, big lady.
A beast lady?
Yeah, she's a very big patient. And I did that case.
So I assume that makes it more difficult?
Yes.
Yeah.
I did that case with one of the other consultants, a gentleman surgeon called Mr. Alfred Franklin. He's been a consultant for more than 25 odd years. So, and although Mr. Franklin was unscrubbed in the case, he was in the theater and by my side throughout the procedure. Okay. So the procedure went all but good because later on when we looked at the film, it was noticed that the screw head went just a little, some millimeter in. Later on, when I was reviewing this patient's notes, I realized that there was a time she was hoisted. And even when I was speaking about it, I said to myself, she was only supposed to have been transferred, not hoisted. So I don't know what confounding situations were, but as of that time, it was noticed that the screw head was a bit proud. And Mr. Franklin knew about it, and Mr. Chatterton and all the other consultants. So it was discussed as a departmental review case. Yeah. Then it was explained to the woman, she had a CT scan of the hip, and it was explained to her that her best option is just to have a total hip replacement. Yeah. So she went straight for a total hip replacement. But Mr. Rand was focusing on just blaming me. And as of that time, Mr. Chatterton and Mr. Franklin kind of defended me. Mr. Chatterton defended me in the sense that he said, I operated under a consultant. Yes. That if anything was wrong with the surgery, that they should stop blaming Gladys.
I just want to make that clear for the viewers out there. So you are a training consultant surgeon. You're under supervision in the theatre. The experienced man with 25 years is there. You completed an operation.
Yes.
There's an issue about a millimetre or sub-millimetre in relation to a particular screw in the hip.
Yes.
And when Mr. Rand then starts saying, well, I told you she can't operate, yes, she's left that screw proud, Mr. Chatterton, another consultant, said, well, actually, she was under the supervision
of a consultant,
of an experienced consultant.
And that she's a registrar.
She's a registrar, and he thought that was fine.
Yes.
Continue.
And Mr. Franklin also defended himself, reminding the team, the orthopedic team that time, that this lady is not being insultive to anybody, but that this lady is grossly obese. And that because of that, when x-rays are being taken, that the fat shadow at times is deceptive, even to the eye of the radiographer and to the eye of the surgeons. And because of it, it was just agreed upon that the patient should not be discharged, that she should just go straight for a total hip replacement. Okay. And to the best of my understanding, that was how it ended. Right. However, Mr. Rand would later on take me alone to the GMC and accused me and presented it like I'm the only one that operated upon this patient and that I made a mistake without any culpability.
And is he allowed to do that as a surgeon, even though he wasn't your line manager? You were now no longer, I suppose you're working in the same department but in a different unit. He was allowed to take you to the GMC?
That is something that GMC had to explain to the public, and I believe also to the parliament, because in GMC regulations, before any consultant is qualified to give you a reference, you must have worked with the person for 3 months at least.
Yeah.
Then GMC is now in a situation where a consultant that was removed from working under for a period of 4 weeks is now galvanizing references.
Your dismissal from the GMC?
Exactly. While the consultant I had worked with for more than 3 months,
was
Mr. Chatterton was happy with my work and could have given a reference based on all my patients and all my surgery under him. But GMC didn't listen. They chose to use whatever Mr. Rand told them to take away my registration.
So Mr. Rand continues his campaign of victimization, and harassment.
Yeah.
And forces, it seems to me, against current policy and procedure for the GMC, the GMC to consider this issue. But would you, with support from Mr. Chatterton and Mr. Franklin, one assumes that was fine?
No, because as of that time, Mr. Rand apparently had a good influence on a lot of them. On the 27th of March, there was a young man that had ankle fracture. It was a nasty fracture. The foot was one side and the whole leg was another side. It was a complete ankle fracture disarticulation. And although this patient has had a back slab, the case was booked in as a biomalleolar fracture. From my little experience of what we've seen in the US and the research I did about ankle management, during the trauma meeting, I explained and gave my own opinion that this patient needs to have a CT scan so that we can have a 3D view. 3D view is like a modular view that will also show you all the ligaments and fine tissue structures to know, what to delineate about the extent of the injuries. But Mr. Rand opposed that. He and another consultant called Mr. Mani. And because I was the trauma on call on the 31st of March, excuse me, they both insisted that I must operate on the patient. Actually, Mr. Rand said, if you don't go ahead to operate on this patient, we have to call the GMC to tell them that you don't want to do surgery.
So, hold on a minute.
Yes.
You've got a patient in front of you. Your medical assessment gives you one course of action.
Yes.
And Mr. Rand is insisting that despite your concerns about this medical intervention with this patient, without the necessary 3D scan, that something could go wrong. He insists, no 3D scan, you do the surgery or I report you to the GMC.
Yes. Wow. And then Mr. Mani said, Gladys, go ahead with the surgery. I'm reachable on my mobile phone if you need me.
So if you need some technical or whatever advice,
support, yes,
you can
call.
Is that standard practice in hospitals?
Yes, it's standard practice with our consultant.
Right.
If a consultant says to you, go ahead with a surgery, if you run into any difficulty, call me.
Yeah.
That means you have a backing.
Yeah.
So if you work up to where you know something is not right, you tell the theatre team and they'll put a call through the switchboard and the consultant should be able to come in and then help you to complete the surgery. Okay. So I believed, in all honesty, that Mr. Mani had my back.
Because he said to you, call me.
Exactly.
All right.
So
you were confident in going ahead?
On that basis.
On that basis.
And because Mr. Rand says there's no need to have a CT scan, when you open, what you see is what you see. Yeah. So that was the word he used. So that CT scans are expensive and that this hospital is running into a lot of debt, that there's no need to go through with an expensive scan. When you open up, what you get is what you see and what you see is what you see. So I now proceeded with the surgery. I opened up and noticed that it wasn't a simple biomalleolar fracture. as was booked. In all honesty, it was a trimalleolar fracture. Tri meaning that it's broken in the 3 points that hold the ankle stable.
Right.
And there was also comminution, meaning that the bone fractures were in little bits. And also there was bone loss. In my program in the US, we have what we call bone supplements, which I believe by now they should also have it in the NHS. It comes in bits of synthetic bones, and some also are really good bones, but they have been demineralized. And it also has a paste. You mix the bone fragments with the paste, and then you use it to fill in the holes where there's bone loss after you've aligned. Now, I'm faced in a situation like that, and I say to my team that this patient actually needs to have an external fixation procedure so that he can go home and come back at a later date for surgery. They went to check for the tools for the external fixation, but they said to me that Mr. Chatterton, the consultant, is the only one in the hospital that holds the key to the cupboards of the external fixation, and that he was away on holiday.
So you knew that you needed a specialist piece of equipment, a brace, as it were.
It's a brace, an external brace.
External brace to provide support for this leg should this go home. And the response of the theatre staff is, the consultant's got the key, he's not here and we can't get in.
Yes.
Wow.
And even before the medical practitioners tribunal service that I faced, Mr. Chatterton came there and he told them that of a fact that he was away on holiday.
So you couldn't have fitted the brace even if you wanted to?
Exactly, that he is the only one that holds the key.
Yeah.
You would think that because of such a mitigating situation, that GMC and the panel could even look kindly at me.
Yeah.
No, they still blamed me. Okay, I now requested for the on-call consultant. The on-call consultant was, no, first of all, I requested for Mr. Mani, who had told me that I can call him. The switchboard tried Mr. Mani's phone several times, but it was switched off. Until date, GMC have not even asked Mr. Mani, why did you switch off your phone and ask the registrar to go on and operate? You know? Then I asked who is the consultant on call. I was told it's a Mr. Max Edwards and that he was in the fracture clinic. I asked if he could please come, that this ankle surgery is beyond what was booked in and that is also beyond my capability as of that time. But Mr. Edwards says, no, tell Gladys to get on with it. It's only a simple bimalleolar fracture. That was over the phone. I said, no, explain to him that it's not a simple bimalleolar fracture. It's more than this. Then he says that he really cannot leave the fracture clinic, that his fracture clinic has been overbooked, and that if he leaves the clinic, that he doesn't have too many hands.
Yeah.
I then asked the team for any consultant who is operating in the orthopedic operation suite. And they told me that Mr. Sudai Rao, the clinical consultant, clinical director, that he is next door. I sent word for somebody to explain to him what has happened and that I need help. I need some assistance. Now, Mr. Rao replied and told them that he was teaching one of my colleague registrars on a procedure, that he was scrubbed in that case.
Right.
Yes, that
so scrubbed mean he couldn't come out.
He couldn't come out.
Yeah.
And that I should describe the extent of the patient's injuries of what I saw. And that he's not happy that I had to be made to handle such a case.
Complicated case.
Exactly, when there was no backup for me. Right. But that after this surgery, when he finishes with his current surgery, that he's going to come in, that I should do my best.
Okay.
So I looked at the situation, and in all honesty, I did my best. My best may not be good enough, but I followed the standard orthopedic teaching, cause no further harm, do your bone alignment first, and then see where you can also fix the ligaments, but do as much as you can in order to have a correct bone reduction so that fracture healing can take place. X-rays were taken, and Mr. Rao did come in after his surgery to come and see what we were able to achieve. he noticed that the medial, the inner side of the foot, the medial side of the screw that I had put was about 2 millimeters long. And he said to me that because this patient is on non-weight bearing and is still to be using crutches, that is not a catastrophic mistake, that this patient will come in the next 3 or 4 weeks as a day surgery so that he will remove the screw and put a shorter screw.
So you could do that in day surgery.
In day surgery.
So basically what he's saying is, look, you've made a small error. It's not catastrophic. It's not load bearing. And in any event, it can be rectified because he's going to come in for day surgery and we can take care of that issue then.
Yes.
You completed a procedure in which you were promised backup. It wasn't there.
Yes.
You completed a procedure in which you'd asked for 3D scanning to give you complete clarity on the injury. It wasn't provided. It wasn't provided and denied. You asked for assistance from other surgeons in the hospital, fearing to go forward without proper support and advice. None was forthcoming.
None.
And in the end, you were told, do your best,
correct,
which you did. And the assessment of the consultant who then comes to look at your work is, other than this screw issue, which we can fix in day surgery, you've done an okay job. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. And also there was no instrument for the external bracing.
Absolutely, no brace.
Which I could have done, and the patient would go home, and later on the surgery could be done when the swelling had calmed down. Yes.
So all of that plus no brace means you did the best you could.
I did my
under
best.
incredibly
difficult situation
and difficult circumstances.
Yes, please.
The GMC didn't want to hear that.
No, because patient was seen in the fracture clinic a week after that by the foot surgeon, a gentleman called Mr. Walzak. Seen week 2, seen week 3, and reviewed. And Mr. Walzak was of the same opinion with Mr. Sudai Rao to allow the fixation I have done to achieve healing. And by the time the patient is to go on a walking cast, then the screw can be removed and a shorter one can be fixed. But Mr. Rand didn't like that because on the 28th of April, which was 4 weeks after the operation I did, remember that bone has started to form. The swelling has come down. Mr. Rand took this patient back into the theater and removed all the metal works and redid the operation, now in a very cosmetic way because there are no challenges to his own situation.
You've done the heavy work.
Exactly. Then he takes the x-rays of what he's done and the x-rays of what I was able to achieve and took me to GMC and said, this doctor cannot do surgery. Now, he negated the fact that I have done ankle surgeries in that hospital before and that I have also had to revise one particular ankle surgery that he did. I'd had to redo it with Mr. Chatterton. And I was this operating surgeon and Mr. Chatterton was my supervisor. And I redid his own surgery. I did not take him to GMC. Now, he took me to GMC on the basis that this ankle was not correctly done, without telling the GMC all the background of how such a case had to...
came about.
Yes. Now, when GMC had to ask me questions in what they call Rule 7 question, I gave a response through Radcliffe Lobresia, a medical legal team, a firm in London. And I explained all this to the GMC. I would have expected GMC to check with the history of what I said.
Authenticate your story.
Thank you, but they didn't. GMC took it as a charge against me and took everything that Mr. Rand said as gospel truth.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what happened to you?
He piled up cases against me. There was another hip case, a hip arthroplasty. I was operating with my SHO, one of the SHOs, Dr. Alexis Thomas, and she was called out because, according to her, she was needed in the CCU, and I was left with the patient and a scrub nurse to operate upon to do a hip surgery. Now, during the hearing that they gave to me, I asked some of the consultants whether it was ideal to let a registrar do a hip surgery only with the scrub nurse. And all of them said no. But GMC still didn't listen. And in that case, when in the end I asked for another doctor to come in and assist me, because I was tired trying to complete the surgery with only the scrub nurse, one of the doctors came in, Mr. Loga, and he's a registrar like myself as of that time. He now claimed that I had made a hole in the femur. And I put my finger and checked. There was no hole. I requested for the x-rays to show if indeed there was any hole. And although I had a copy of that x-ray, I showed it to GMC. There is no hole in it. Wow. The UK public, they are welcome to see the x-rays, because if we put it up to them, let any other surgeon check.
You can see.
There was no hole in it. But GMC believed everything that Mr. Rand said, that I made a hole in a patient's femur when there was no hole. There was an AP view. AP view is anterior, posterior, front to back. And there was also a lateral shot of the x-ray, so that if there was any hole, if you don't see it front to back, you see it by the side. Yeah. But there was no hole.
There was no hole.
None at all.
So you've got 3 fabricated cases.
Yes.
Largely driven by Mr. Rand.
Yes.
Who seems to have made it a personal mission to drum you out of the NHS and to end your career as a orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah, he didn't stop in the hospital. I got another job at the University of North Staffordshire Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent. That was from April of 2011, when I had finished with Princess Royal Hospital in Bromley. Mr. Rand pursued me to that hospital. Wow. Because NHS system is, once you finish working, you get a reference from where you worked before, just like other employment. Yeah. Okay. So in their requesting for a letter of reference from me, Mr. Chatterton had come back from his annual leave, and Mr. Rand put a lot of pressure that they must tell the surgeons at the University of North Staffordshire Hospital that they are about to take me to the GMC so that I should not be allowed to operate. Wow. But there's a good thing that happened, because everything I'm saying is I should be judged based on the actual works I have done on patients. Yeah. This is why I'm believing I'm doing this online campaign, so that another doctor is not treated this way, not just on hearsay and allegations. Right. Then the person is struck off. Right. So by the time Mr. Chatterton returned, I had done some operations at the Stoke-on-Trent Hospital. And they were successful? They were good. I had done ankle, I had done DHS, I had done hemiarthroplasty. Right. I've also done some MUA. We call MUA manipulation under anesthesia of some fractures, and put back slab on them. And they were all fine. Right. So from April 1 till around May 12th, when Mr. Chatterton contacted the hospital, I was working like any other registrar, with my due respect, with my chances for operation, with consultants supervising me when I'm operating, and also taking my own call. But from the time Mr. Rand contacted this hospital, Mr. Chatterton called me on my mobile phone, because I had been his registrar. He did have my contact at that time, and told me that this is a very bad news that he's about to tell me, break down to me, that Mr. Rand had called a strong meeting and gotten most of the consultants to sign an agreement that I will be taken to GMC. Now, what upsets him, according to Mr. Chatterton, he's still there to defend himself, is that I'm not even the worst registrar in Princess Royal University Hospital, that all the time I worked with him, that I did look after all his patients. And that was why I asked him, I said, if I looked after all your patients, why are you not the one giving me reference based on the care I gave your patients? Why must you accept what Mr. Rand is doing to take me to the GMC? And his answer was? He says because it's a departmental agreement that he had no choice, but he had to agree. I said, but I don't believe in that. I said, I'm your registrar. I worked under you. You are my consultant. You are the one that will attest to how I worked. I said, even though I lived in Coventry, I was always coming to work on time. I never at any time was late. And how is it that after 4 months of sacrificing my time, working, commuting, and then you just say you accept what Mr. Rand has said. But he said that's how it is. He contacted his hospital. And then I now had a meeting with a Mr. John Dwyer and a Mr. David Emery. And I was now told that I will no longer be allowed to operate.
Wow.
And that I'll now be under what is called supernumerary. And that everything I'm doing, I have to be cross-checking with everybody. In short, I was being treated as if I wasn't even a doctor again. It was a very uncomfortable period of time. And I was very tearful, and I didn't like it. And all through my time in the hospital, I was just being monitored.
Do you want a break?
Yeah, 1 second.
So you now face this conspiracy almost by the consultant, Mr. Rand, to inveigle, convince, pressure, whatever means necessary, other consultants to give a false impression of the quality
of my work.
You must be devastated.
I was, because I had worked with Professor David Barrett in University of Southampton, University Hospital, Southampton, England. And he knew I was a dedicated junior doctor, because there was a time he even called me the departmental heroine, because I had finished an on-call and we were short-staffed and they needed somebody else to continue to take the next or 2 days on call. And I volunteered and took it. So that was how I made a good impression on Mr. Barrett. So that even if he sees me on the street, he knows me.
Yeah.
I also worked well with Mr. Kerry Allerton in Southeast Hospital. Even if he sees me along the corridor, he knows me because I'm a dedicated professional worker. I worked well with Professor Sean Hughes. I did a research study under him, an award-winning research study under him with Imperial College. He also knew me and knows me as a dedicated worker. But I'm now in a situation where all my history and past history of working was now being reduced and eroded by Mr. Rand's campaign. He didn't just stop in his hospital. He's now taking it over to another hospital.
So he's following you in your career, determined to bring it to an end, an unjust end. The GMC finally make a decision. When did they make a decision?
If I could please bring out something. At the North Staffordshire Hospital, Mr. Rand called my attention to a case of a young lad, 9-year-old child. He had been trampolining and landed with the left elbow. I think that was on the 4th of June, 2011. And this patient was seen by a GP on the call center, by an SHO doctor in A&E, a consultant A&E, accident and emergency consultant, by the specialist registrar in orthopedics, the registrar in orthopedics, all on the 4th of June. Then he was now invited to the fracture clinic outpatient. Then on the 7th of June was when I saw this patient. I was the 6th doctor to see this patient. I examined this young lad. There were no neurological deficits, no nerve symptoms. I looked at the x-rays. He was on what we call a back slab. Now, because he has now been on the back slab for 4 days, I now had to request for a complete slab, an x-ray after that. This was done. The x-ray also showed that there was no obvious fracture. So conservative management with the back slab was what was expected. And that is what the textbook teaches us, and that is what we are taught. Then I requested for the patient to be seen in the fracture clinic in a week's time. They contacted me and said there is no opening on exactly a week's time. What of the 10th day? I say, fair enough, that is still okay. This patient was seen 10 days later by another registrar, a colleague called Dr. Mark Ockenden. Now, unfortunately for myself, patient after being seen by Dr. Ogbuneke was now seen on June 18th, which was 14 days of his injury. At that time, he started developing what we call ulnar nerve symptoms, with the little finger bending a bit, showing that something is wrong upper, you know. Then Mr. Dwyer, the pediatric orthopedic consultant, was also on call that day and reviewed this patient. In the end, had to take the patient to the theater and noticed that there was a trapping of the ulnar nerve. Maybe because the swelling has come down, maybe the fracture that was not very clear has shifted and it trapped the nerve. But the patient's symptoms were being corrected. Then Mr. Dwyer wrote a letter to the patient's GP and made a note that in an apology, which of course we are sorry when there's a misdiagnosis or a near misdiagnosis. So he apologized on my behalf and on behalf of Dr. Mark Ogbuneke, because two of us are the orthopedic first people that saw this patient, that said that it's a rare type of injury that is not really very common, and that because we're registrars, we're trainee doctors, that it may be that we don't have the hindsight that injury on the elbow could have such an effect in the end.
So he said very clearly
Yeah.
that this particular operation was for a rare kind of injury that would normally be beyond the experience
of the registrar,
the trainee registrars.
Yes.
And so to that extent, although making an apology, it's one of which actually this required somebody along one of the consultants who saw the child before you did.
Yes.
Because there were 6 doctors before you saw the child.
Yes.
And none of them report any nerve injury up to that point.
No.
But only after you see the child, 10 days, 14 days or so later, he comes back in with nerve injury, which is then ascribed to
myself.
To yourself.
Yes, Mr. Dwyer actually says that the consultant of A&E, accident and emergency, should be blameless, and is blameless. That because he's not an orthopedic doctor, that he doesn't know how to diagnose nerve injury. Right. That the GP is also blameless, that they don't know how to diagnose nerve symptoms, and also the SHO and every other person. And I don't know what reason he gave about Mark Ogbuneke, who saw the patient after me. Mark happened to be a white male orthopedic registrar. I'm a black female orthopedic registrar. Now, Mr. Dwyer asked me to do a case study of such injuries. And in all honesty, with the purest of hearts, I took it up to do it because I like asking questions. I like research studies. I want to know how many young people will come with elbow injuries that could end up with stuff like that. So I started off with literature reviews on this and went and presented with him, and he accepted it. But unfortunately, by August 2011, Mr. Dwyer took me to the GMC. He accused me and said that he told me to do a case study, and I refused. And that I was the one who failed to notice that there were nerve symptoms on this patient right from the time of the injury. I replied GMC and showed them copies of the pages of the literature review I had started. I showed them my registered number with the Cochrane Library of the University Hospital, that I have already started journal studies on this. But because my job ended when it did in August, that there was no way I could go back to that hospital.
You couldn't complete your studies?
I couldn't complete it.
If you've been struck off being a doctor by the GMC?
No, but that time I've not been struck off, but the job at Stoke-on-Trent had finished.
Right.
So I couldn't go back to it because I don't have access to anything. Yeah. And then number 2, that it's unfair that Mr. Rand would treat me differently from my colleague registrar, Dr. Ogbuneke, and also from my other colleague doctors. And I said to them that it's not in me to start lying, that I did examine the child's hand, not just the ulnar nerve, but all the other 2 major nerves in the hand, and that I didn't see any nerve symptoms. Yeah. That if I had seen, I would remember and I would have dictated it and I would have tried to find something to do. But because there was none, that was why I continued with the conservative management. But the GMC took the view from Mr. Dwyer that only I should be held culpable, and accountable for that patient's injury on that.
So it makes no sense at all. And so what you've got is a series of consultants who have, in one way or the other, conspired against you to misrepresent the quality of your work and place blame where it shouldn't really lie in relation to a number of very small issues, really. The last one, the nerve-ending one, may be the most serious, but the rest were fairly minor deviations from procedure, most of which were conducted either without supervision or in the absence of the correct medical equipment.
Or even any support at all.
Or any support at all.
My answer also to some people that say, or may say that, why is she telling these stories now? I finished work...
Well, tell us, when did the GMC...
Yes, I finished work at the Stoke-on-Trent Hospital in August of 2011. Fortunately for me, I got a job at the Heart of England Foundation Trust between December 2011 and July 2014. So for a span of 2 years, I was in one hospital. And in the Birmingham Hospital, Heart of England Foundation Trust, I worked at the Heartland Hospital, worked at the Solihull Hospital, and also at the Good Hope Hospital of the Trust. I did ankle surgeries, I did hip procedures, I also did ankle procedures and hand procedures. And I have most of these things on my record. In some of them, I worked as a locum registrar on my own. And I had good references from the consultants I worked with, Mr. Ved Goswami, Mr. Morgan Mahmood, later on then with Mr. Fernandez, Richard Fernandez, and with Mr. Pimpal Naka. And before the GMC, the clinical director, a very nice man, he has this father figure about him, Mr. Brian Banerjee. He was the clinical director, very respected and respectable surgeon. He attested to the GMC about my work. And that as of that particular point in time, in 2015, when they were assessing me, that I have shown for 2 years.
Consistent good quality.
Consistent good work. Consistent caution, and that I was safe to patients, and that patients are safe with me.
And that was his assessment?
And that was his assessment.
Okay.
I also had attestation from other registrars I've worked with. There was also a Mr. Tom Wood, a registrar. He's a white registrar. So it's not as if it's a case of me, black against white. It is a case of, look at how these trusts were really very discriminatory against me, a black female surgeon who had the hope to complete her surgery, her surgical training. But at the Heart of England Foundation Trust, there were white consultants, there were Asian consultants, there were a few
they treated
black.
You fairly.
They treated myself and other registrars with respect to our career and with our right to training. So that's what I'm trying to bring out. Because in that hospital, there were a lot of Asian registrars I worked with, and they wrote letters of attestation on my behalf to GMC. There were also some black African registrars I worked with. They also attested. And there was also some of the white registrars I worked with, like this Tom Wood. He wrote a reference for me as well. But GMC didn't look at any of these things. So it was a situation that GMC was using a period of 2 or 3 weeks. I worked with Mr. Rand to totally erode all my years of medical training and all my years of surgical training.
Well, this must have been absolutely devastating for you personally and your family. Tell us a little bit about what the impact has been on you and your family.
It has not been good because my children have been very supportive of me and in my career. Even if it's the time of their birthdays, and if mommy is not around on that particular day, we could always celebrate another time. So they've always accepted that. But to now see mom, who has worked so hard, and at a time when she could be enjoying a bit of what she's done, to just be reduced to nothing, it's very disheartening. GMC took me to 2 different high court cases in Manchester. I want to bring this out because the decision of those judges now comes up to be the same thing that the Court of Appeal have said about the case of Dr. Hadiza Bawagawa.
Now, Dr. Hadiza Bawagawa
Yes.
is somebody who was a trainee surgeon,
A trainee pediatrician,
pediatrics,
yes.
And a little boy died. We all saw that on the news.
Yes.
And in the end, they hung that sister out to dry as being responsible for that boy's death.
Yes.
But on appeal at the Supreme Court, the High Court,
Yes.
it was noted that she couldn't have been responsible because she was a trainee pediatrician and she needed supervision.
And she needed support as well that were not there. No doctor is ever happy when any patient dies.
Yeah, of course.
As a mother and as a doctor, my heart goes out to the family of that young lad. Nobody is happy. But it's good to look at something on a wider scale. In Dr. Hadiza's case, there were a lot of system failures. People who are supposed to be there to support her when she's working were not there.
And this is your case now.
And this is exactly like what happened to me.
Because you're out of time.
Yes.
What people will, and I'll have to ask a question, people will say, why didn't you take action back in 2015? You went to the court to challenge the decision, right? You lost those decisions. When did those judgments come in?
In 2014, in September 2014, to be precise, 25th September 2014, I appeared before His Honor Judge Palin in Manchester High Court.
Yeah.
He told GMC that all the examples of what they are bringing is not sufficient to take away her registration. Wow. That she is a trainee surgeon.
Yeah.
That it is for her to be allowed to complete her, means myself, Dr. Johnson Ogbuneke, to complete her training under consultant supervision, like other registrars. GMC wasn't happy with that. So GMC now applied in order to kind of like repeal that decision, appeal the decision, appeal the judgment. And that was on 5th of January 2015. And before another judge, His Honor Judge Waxman, Judge Waxman, and the learned judge, upheld the decision of his learned brother, Judge Palin, reminding GMC that I am a trainee surgeon, that as a trainee, they cannot expect to see excellent and perfect surgery, that there has to be space to learn, but that I should be allowed to operate and to complete my training under consultant supervision. GMC still didn't listen. So they felt, no, that they must take me to a full hearing. So they now took me to a full hearing. This case was supposed to end as a pilot adjudication meeting under that first investigation. But GMC insisted that I should go before a fitness to practice hearing. So the first investigation says they are concluding it with a pilot adjudication meeting.
Which means more training and more supervision.
Exactly. Right. And I could have just been given 6 months suspension and then warned not to do any operation without my consultant being present.
But the GMC insisted that you went to a full hearing because they knew that's the only place where you could be completely
struck off. So despite that first 18-month investigation and despite the decisions of the 2 independent judges in Manchester that I should be allowed to complete my training, GMC didn't follow it. They still pushed for me to go to the full hearing.
And you lost that hearing? I
lost at the hearing because I was not represented. All along in the line, I've been represented, but due to financial constraints, I could not afford legal representation, and they dealt with me the way they wanted.
So that was in 2015. You've been taken to a full board hearing, despite your years of dedication in getting to your academic and professional standards, and an award-winning researcher with a record of surgery that is 99% free of problems. Nevertheless, the GMC have dismissed you, struck you off on the basis of your performance in a few weeks with a hostile consultant, largely Mr. Rand, although there were one others there too, who have consistently misrepresented the quality of your work.
Yes.
But today is 2019.
Yes.
This all happened in 2015.
Yes.
Why is the delay in bringing this to public attention?
I appealed the decision of the Medical Practitioners Tribunal Service, MPTS, because I wasn't happy how they concluded against me without looking at the patient's notes. There were patients that they claimed had damaged the hip and hip ligament. Meanwhile, the patient had been discharged on day 7 of my surgery. And if anybody was looking into all those, they will see that the conclusions are actually different from what's in the patient's notes, which is why one of the reasons I'm doing this online campaign, so that there will be a need to review what was done. However, after filing in for my appeal, I lost my dad.
Okay.
I have a very close relationship with my dad. He's been like my rock, my strength. My father, Honorable Justice Jonah Johnson of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He died, and his death knocked me off.
Absolutely.
I couldn't continue with a lot of things. And even the appeal that came up in June 2016, I wasn't focused. I didn't have the fight in me. I requested for an adjournment of the case, but GMC still insisted that it has to be done. I needed time off to go and bury my dad so that I can continue with all this. But GMC pushed that the appeal has to go on, and I lost. I lost on the basis that the judge, His Honor Judge John Irwin, he says that he's not coming to look at everything that has happened and all the materials of evidence, that is only just coming to look at the legal procedures. And on that, I was unrepresented. I was in person. And he just says on the balance of probability that because the consultant, everybody has come and spoken and given their attestation, that they are more believable than only myself. And I continue to say that balance of probability is not really a strong test, that it would be good if they were going to look at the patient's notes to really prove beyond all doubt that I'm really a bad doctor, that I'm not. But I lost the case. And recovering myself from the period of bereavement was not easy. And also financially, I was not strong enough to start challenging that decision. I went through my MP, Mr. Geoffrey Robinson, Coventry Northwest constituency. Through him, I got in touch with Bar Pro Bono. And for a period of nearly 1 year, they continued to promise me that there will be a barrister who could help me. But in the end, no barrister was forthcoming. And as of around June of 2018, they made it clear to me that they couldn't help. Then Dr. Hadiza's case came out in August of 2018. And that was when I was more upset again, that this is the conclusion that the Court of Appeal has reached, is actually the decisions of the 2 independent High Court judges, so that if GMC had even followed that order, there would not have even been any need to have taken me to the MPTS tribunal or even to strike me off.
That was a vindictive move by the GMC.
Exactly. To make sure that I'm taken away. And then on the other hand, GMC has made me a bad doctor, but the outcome of my ankle research up till date is now the standard for ankle trauma protocol in the whole of NHS in England. Now, they are making use of all my years of study, all my years of academic and exams, and going to the US, but I'm penniless. I cannot even afford my legal representation. Some doctors may be comfortable somewhere and feel that, oh, why is she coming out to say all this? I'm please begging each and every one of us, vote into my petition so that my case can be reviewed.
So we're talking about a petition,
yes,
which is demanding,
yes,
that your case is reviewed by the GMC.
Yes.
Technically, it's legally out of time.
Yes.
But you want special circumstances that this recent decision
of Hadiza's case,
yes, has very profound implications for your case.
Exactly.
And that your case should be reviewed in the light of
yes,
that decision.
Because 2 High Court judges have already made orders on my case.
that you should be in the pilot training regime.
Yes, that I should be under supervision to complete my training. GMC denied me that pilot meeting that would just be suspension for some few months, but they went ahead for the hearing. But 2 High Court judges said she is a trainee surgeon. You cannot take away her registration based on errors that are not so catastrophic. And you cannot take away her registration in 2015 for errors of what happened in 2010 or 2011. Look at where she has worked recently and what is her work pattern. If she has remedied, that is now a reason to allow her to complete training. So what we have achieved from Hadiza's case is very important. And it is also important for GMC to be made to really look at the way they treat doctors. You know, saying that 1 or 2 consultants will come and raise allegations against somebody without judging that person on the merits of their work is wrong.
Technically, we're out of time to any legal claim against the GMC, but we think there's a moral case to answer here. One, I think there's the question about black doctors in the NHS who find themselves disproportionately struck off from the NHS. This is a very real issue for lots of black doctors in the NHS. Yeah. Secondly, I think the Supreme Court decision in relation to
Dr. Dr.
Hadiza has profound implications for your case.
Yes.
Thirdly, I think most people, if they've taken the time to listen to this video and see both the distress that you're under, but also the mountain that you've had to climb in order to try and prove your professional competence, ethics and integrity, has been enormous, and would want to support you by signing that petition, calling on the GMC to review your case, yes, calling on them for natural justice to be applied, yes, in this instance, and hopefully alerting and rallying other doctors who are in training, yes, to some of the dangers that can befall them, yes, in the NHS.
Yes. It's very important that we have a wider view of such situations, not just a myopic or narrow view. Because somebody can say, it doesn't bother me, it's not me. But it may be your niece, it may be your nephew, it may be your son, it may be your doctor, it may even be yourself. Because any person can get up and decide to rally out around doctors, just like Mr. Rand did against me. And that is it for you.
And let's face it, consultants are an old boys club.
Yes, and as far as I continue to say, I'm not saying that I did very perfect or excellent surgeries.
But you were a trainee.
Too, thank you. And also, I followed all principles of trauma at each time. Cause no further harm, do your best. Yeah. Where you are stuck, call the next person in line.
Yes.
I put all those cautions in place. And other than that, I've had to appear before 2 independent learned judges who arrived at the same conclusion.
That you're a trainee.
His Honor Judge Pellin and His Honor Judge Waxman in Manchester. And their decisions are in line with the outcome of August 2018 for Dr. Hadiza. Yeah. And that is why I'm saying, please sign my petition so that GMC could be called back to review why they treated me the way they did. Because for 16 years, GMC sent me certificates of good standing as a good doctor. I had nothing wrong in my practice. I was an SHO in the days before we had EU working hour directives. And you will be on call from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday morning before you knock off. I've done my bit. I served my time. Now as a registrar, coming to finish my higher surgical training, I now meet this Mr. Rand, who says to me to my own face that I'm a female and a black woman and that orthopedic surgery has no room for me. Nobody has ever made me conscious of the fact that I'm a woman. I see myself as a professional. I worked with renowned surgeons in this England. I've told you about Professor David Barrett in Southampton, Professor Sean Hughes in London, Mr. Allerton. I've also told you about Professor David Salexon in the US. I did all this. Even in the hospital where he was, I worked with Mr. Paul Gill. Mr. Gill came to the MPTS meeting and told the panel off and said to them as a registrar that they did not perform perfect surgeries. That if he had known that that was why he was called here, that he would not have come. So I'm still calling on the public to force Mr. Chatterton to give me my letter of reference after working with him for 4 months. He has not given me my letter of reference. He's only allowed himself to be pulled in by Mr. Rand to be used in order to have me struck off after I had worked very well for him.
I think at that point, we'll conclude this interview. We appeal with people to, in the public, in the domain, to sign the petition, to contact GMC, to make their demands known that this case is at least reviewed and looked at again.
Yes.
I think that's the least you deserve.
Yes.
We express our solidarity and sympathy with you.
Thank you.
And we're going to support you,
Thank
in promoting this petition that can hopefully lead to a review in what is clearly to me a very clear case of major injustice and discrimination. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on the Jasper Drive Time.
Thank you so much.